the way I saw them handle that situation was so genuine that it made me realize that there's more to this personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so all of a sudden, I don't have a job, I don't have an income, and it's what am I going to do? It forced me to really, do I really trust God? I realized that for most of my life, I dare say all of my life up to that point, Jesus Christ was no different than any other historical figure. I witnessed to and ministered to a lot of young people, and that's my calling. I believe God has placed that calling on my life. I give my parents so much credit for even suggesting that, but they had instilled in me basically a Colossians 3:23 attitude. Whatever you do, do it to the best of your ability. Growing as men, that is so fruitful and so joyous to watch that happen in these guys.
Well, that is just a preview of a really delightful conversation that's on deck next. So let's play ball. Gentlemen, welcome into the Next Man Up podcast. So good, as always, to have you along with us for another episode. You know this, my name is Mark Stanifer. I'm joined today by my sidekick, John Gregory, and we are both honored to be with you to bring you another conversation today. Before we get to that, just a quick reminder that the best way to connect with us, feedback, questions, suggestions, is just to email us. You can get us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. Well, next up to the plate today, guys, is Dukes Knutson. There's a lot that I could say about Dukes, and I know you'll be interested to know that for the last 15 years, he's been the press box supervisor for the Tampa Bay Rays. And how he even got to that job is a fun story that unfolds. But I think more than that, this conversation is about veteran wisdom, someone who is more experienced and still today is doing his best to live out what it means to be a healthy and godly man. And he's investing in those coming behind him as well. As I said at the top, this is a delightful conversation. It was a joy for both John and I to be able to just listen and explore Dukes' story, and it's a privilege to be able to bring it to you today. So I hope you enjoy this and resonate with his life and how he has lived his life to the fullest and what that can mean for you as a man, as a father, and how you help your son to do the same. Okay, let's hear it from Dukes himself. Here we go. Well, Dukes, thank you for joining us today. I know John and I have been anticipating this conversation for a while. We're excited to hear you, your story, talk a little bit about baseball and how that's impacted your life and all the other stuff that's going to come out that is just part of who you are. So thank you for joining us and giving us some of your time today.
Well, it's certainly my pleasure. I often try to convince, especially the ball players that I work with, that everybody has a testimony. Some of us, like myself, believe too often that our testimonies aren't worth sharing because there's no dramatic moment. There's no thunderbolt in the sky. But yet, I think Scripture is clear that we all have a testimony. And so I appreciate your allowing me to share a little bit about mine today.
Yeah, well, so maybe that's a great place to start because I can relate to what you just said. But when you think back on your testimony, your faith journey, your life, your story, What are some of the big things that stand out and are worthy of capturing here for me? Because I know very little about you and your story, as well as for our listeners.
Well, to start off with, I was raised in a Catholic family. I have 4 siblings, and it was a pretty strict, staunch Catholic family. And we were taught, we go to church every week, and I went to Catholic grade school, and I'm grateful for my upbringing. It taught me that God is important. And so by the time I got to high school, I even went through a stage where my life's goal was to become a priest.
Mm.
And that came all the way through high school, but then things started to change. And I started, I guess, questioning some of the theology that I was brought up with. And I'd really never been exposed to anything outside of the Catholic Church. And actually, it was my freshman year in college where I met a tennis player from the University of Minnesota Duluth who was a Baptist, very strong Baptist. And we had a lot of talks about the Lord. And he challenged me, and he said, well, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? And here I had grown up with this Catholic upbringing and went to Catholic grade school, went through confirmation, and I had no idea what he was talking about. What do you mean a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? And so that really got me thinking, and I started exploring faith beyond the Catholic Church.
Mm.
And I discovered a lot of new things that, again, I had not been exposed to in my younger years. When I share my testimony, I usually highlight 3 events in my life that were life-changing. And they all occurred within about a year and a half time. About 1982, when I was a little over 30 years old. The first was my first niece, 6-year-old niece, was killed. She was driving her bicycle and she was hit by a motorcyclist. And this was out in the state of Washington. And I was from Minnesota, so I flew out to be with my sister and her family during this tragic time. And from the moment I arrived at their house, just hours after their oldest daughter had died, I felt what I know now was the Holy Spirit. It was nothing like I expected it. My sister came to the door. This was 11 o'clock at night, and she had 2 younger kids, and she and her husband and the 2 younger kids were all sleeping on the living room floor in front of the fireplace. And I opened the door and I saw that, and I was just like, this isn't right. Your daughter just died. You're supposed to be mourning and tears, and there should be lots of people here comforting you. And yet my sister just looked at me and she smiled at me and she said, man, I'm glad you're here. And then she went on and said, I'm going to wake up Carly, the 4-year-old girl. I said, oh, please don't. No, she's sleeping. Let her sleep. She says, no. She says, the kids were excited that Uncle Dukes was coming, and we promised them that we would wake him up when you arrived. And so they woke up Carly, and the 4-year-old girl, she looked at me and she smiled and she said, I'm the oldest now.
Wow.
And it just tore up my heart. And this whole scene is just not what I expected and not the way I thought it should be. But spending that week with them out there as we celebrated Nikki's life changed everything. My sister by this time was an evangelical Christian, and she too had been raised Catholic, obviously. And the way I saw them handle that situation was so genuine that it made me realize that there's more to this personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So that was the first event. The second event was after 9.5 years, I lost my job. I was laid off as a teacher, and I'd gotten a layoff notice every year for 9 years, but never had been laid off actually. And so when they gave me my layoff notice, I thought, oh, here we go again. And but this time I actually did get laid off. And so all of a sudden I don't have a job, I don't have an income, and it's, what am I going to do? And that's a long story. I won't get into it right now, but that was a pretty dramatic event, and it forced me to really, do I really trust God?
Mm.
And the third event occurred right towards the end of that school year. Many of my students attended a retreat. It was called TEC, Teens Encounter Christ. And they had these TEC experiences 4 times a year in my hometown of Duluth, Minnesota. And every time some of my students would go to one of these retreats, and when they came back to school the next week, oh man, I could see a difference in these kids. And they knew that I was a Christian, and they encouraged me to go to one of these retreats. And it sounded very appealing to me, but at the same time I said, well, wait a minute, this is Teens Encounter Christ. I'm 32 years old. I don't qualify. And they said, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know, as long as you're young at heart. So again, a really long story. That it's an interesting story, but we don't have time to get the whole thing. I went to one of these TECs, and for the first time in my life, Jesus Christ became real. Mm-hmm. Jesus Christ went from my head to my heart. And it's at that retreat that I look back now and say, that's when I developed a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I realized that for most of my life, I dare say all of my life up to that point, Jesus Christ was no different than any other historical figure. He was no different than George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. I knew everything. I knew about him in my head. I could spit out facts about him, but I didn't have him in my heart. And that TEC experience made me realize that. So I take those 3 events combined, and that's what I look at as the genesis of my personal commitment and personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
So obviously that was a super pivotal period, 12, 18 months, 2 years for you. But it's interesting, the theme that has already emerged from just a little bit of glimpse into your story. So I don't know when it was that that you were feeling the potential toward being a priest, but early teen, mid-teen, maybe. Do you remember? Do you remember exactly when it was?
Not exactly, but it was in late elementary years.
So early on.
6th grade, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there must have been something that was stirring in your heart even back then to be able to reach people, to help, and then to hear at least for a period of time, the teacher that you were. Obviously that's a heart calling too. And so while the decision to embrace Jesus in a true personal relationship way didn't happen until early 30s, the seeds were planted for who you were becoming, and God was just leading you all along the way to that point at which you were ready, I guess, to take that next step in trusting Him with the relationship, with who you are, with who He wants you to be, and where He wants you to go. At least I may be reading too much into it. I doubt it. I'm probably pretty close here. That's the theme and the thread that I hear already in just a handful of minutes of you sharing your story.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, growing up in a very strong Catholic-based family, God was important. We prayed before meals. We went to church. We went to confession on a regular basis. We did all the Catholic things. And so I thought I was doing all the right things. My faith was based on my performance, doing this, doing that, be a good person. And I was doing all those things, and I liked it. I liked it. Probably in my later elementary years, 5th or 6th grade, at our church, we had a new priest as our assistant pastor. And he was a young guy, and he and I kind of hit it off. I was an altar server, and so we became friends. He became someone I looked up to a lot. I remember some days after school just stopping by the church and just visiting him. And he was always encouraging me to, consider priesthood, even at that young age. And as I got into the junior high school, and I did, I was pretty infatuated with the idea of being a priest. Again, I look back on it now and I chuckle, because I know one of the things that I thought was so cool was just the garb that they wore. Was, I thought, hey, wouldn't that be cool to be able to dress like that? I had 2 buddies in our neighborhood, and the 3 of us did a lot of things together. And again, people would laugh at this. I laugh at it today myself, but we would come home from school and we would actually play mass. And me being the oldest one, I usually got to be the priest, and those 2 other guys got to be the altar servers.
Just the way you wanted it, right?
Exactly. And in fact, one year for Christmas, my friend's mother was a seamstress. She made us the actual vestments.
Oh, wow.
So we were dressed as priests, and we would play priest, and we would play mass all the time. And so that was those late elementary, junior high school years. But as I got into high school, and that's when my fascination in sports really took off. I was never a gifted athlete, and I knew I wasn't going to be a gifted athlete ever, but I found other ways to pursue sports, even through high school and college, and now it's brought me this far.
I want to draw an interesting parallel here, Dukes, because I've never thought about this until I'm listening to your story. So as a young elementary age kid, you had this passion, burning inside of you that's not unlike what a lot of other young boys have for baseball or sports. And parenting is so interesting at that age of how do you foster and encourage what your kid is passionate about, for their future. So that's an interesting parallel about a future in the priesthood and ministry that I don't know a lot of parents, particularly dads, would think about. All right, how do I foster this and encourage this in my son? I'm wondering if you've thought about that before, and if you have some encouragement for dads who may be sitting in that.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because my parents, being very strict Catholics as they were, they thought it was pretty cool that they had a son who was so interested in becoming a priest, and I think they both kind of hoped that might pan out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they found us, my buddies and I, playing priest and that type of thing, they certainly didn't discourage it at all. Here's another, hopefully interesting part of this story is that I told you I got laid off from teaching after 9 years, and that came as pretty much a shock to me. And I started going through that whole discernment process all over again. And I started really thinking that maybe God really did want me to be a priest. And maybe I missed the call. And so I actually applied for seminary, and I was accepted, and I was ready to start seminary in the fall of 1984. And few things happened to change that direction. One was one of my final interviews with the bishop. We found out that we had a couple fundamental disagreements, and the bishop decided that well, maybe we should wait a year on this. Maybe you're not actually ready. And I agreed. I said, yeah, I don't feel comfortable either right now. And not 2 weeks after that happened, I was recalled to teaching. The school district called me and said, hey, we're recalling some of our laid off teachers, and you're next on the list. And I don't use the word coincidentally. I always say God incidentally, because God's involved in all of it. So God incidentally, the principal who called me was a friend of mine, and he says, I know you're planning on going into the priesthood, so all you got to do is tell me that you don't want this job so I can go on to the next person. And I said, you know what, I think I'll take that job. And so I got back into teaching, and went for another 24 years after that. So it's, again, it's so easy to look back on these things and see how God was operating all the time. I have so much respect, admiration. I have a list of, I think it's 38 pastors in my life who I have on my daily prayer book.
Mm-hmm.
And I pray for them regularly. I try to send them messages of encouragement. Being a pastor is such an incredible calling in life. And I have so much respect for them. And yet I'm so grateful that God wasn't calling me.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't my calling. He called me to be a teacher, a high school teacher. I did that for 34 years. I'm proud of it. I believe it's such a noble profession. It's every bit of a calling as being a pastor. Oftentimes people would ask me, well, what do you do for a living, Dukes? And I'd tell them I'm a missionary. I'm a missionary in the public high schools, because it's the greatest mission field in America, the public high schools. And so it was a great career. I loved every minute of it. But you know what? I'd be fired today if I was still teaching today.
It's a little different. It's changed, hasn't it?
Oh my goodness, it's changed.
Yeah. I'm gonna express a thought, and the two of you are welcome to react to it. I think, at least as far as I can see in my lifetimes, I haven't gone researched prior to my lifetime, but in my living experience, I've seen numerous times where the tug toward helping people, ministering to people, pastoring to people with a small p, not with a capital P, but with a small p, a tug on people's hearts has led them down a path that is more of the traditional priest path or pastor in a church path, because those are the paths that we could see this call and tug playing out. When in reality, the invitation is to take that call and that tug and to be the missionary, so to speak, small m, and wherever you work, or in the passion projects that you do outside of the things that you do to make a living. I see you both kind of shaking your head. Reactions to that thought?
Well, I'm in full agreement of that, Mark. I really believe that God calls every single one of us. That's the Great Commission. Every one of us who claims to be a Christian is to go out into the world. Well, that's a big world out there. I, for example, I've gone through the whole discernment process of, should I go to Africa and go to do mission work over there and stuff? That's not my calling. I've never felt that calling. But I've been able to work with particularly kids through the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which I've been involved with for over 50 years now. Now with Baseball Chapel, I witness to and minister to a lot of young people. And that's my calling. I believe God has placed that calling on my life. And I'm going to try to do it to the best of my ability. But I'm so grateful that other people have different callings, to go to Africa or wherever. But there's so much ministry opportunity right here at home that we need to take care of. And so that's where I'm feeling led anyway. How
Yeah.
about you, John? What were you going to say?
Yeah, there's a lot you could say about this, but I'll just come back to the thought about dads and their kids, that not being so concerned about what particular profession that the kid may be expressing that they want to be in. I mean, and encouraging them about what it is, but as it may evolve and so forth. The point would be everything that the two of you just said. How are you representing God wherever you are, whatever you do?
Yeah. It's interesting to me, John, the question you asked a few minutes ago, encouraging, as a father, encouraging your kids. So I grew up playing baseball, played into college, and I knew I was never going to be paid to play baseball, but I played at a decently competitive and high level and understood the game. And when my first son picked up the bat or started to hold the ball, I'm like, oh, it's on. It's on. This is going to be great. I'm going to be able to continue this with my son. And not so much. So I had to get to that point as a dad to realize it's not about me. I had my opportunity, I had my experience, and it sure would be cool if I could live through my son, my next son. That didn't happen. My daughter, nope, that didn't happen. Okay, so I'm done with that in as a father here. But coming to grips with that was an important part of my fathering journey, because whether it's a ministry calling or a professional pursuit or an athletic gifting or pursuit, it's less about, in fact, it's very little about me as the father, and it's about helping my kid to pursue their journey and tying it back to the idea of there may be multiple paths. If the path, so like the interest for you, Dukes, was sports, cemented early in your teenage years or college years or whatever. But it doesn't mean you ended up as the athlete. It manifested in a different way. All that to say, the path is less important as the calling, the passion, the interest, the desire that's there. And as dads, that's what we want to foster in our own kids. Anyway, just John, your thought prompted that from me.
Sure.
Well, let me share a quick story, and I want to thank and applaud my parents for kind of recognizing what you're talking about, Mark. I believe they saw that I was developing this passion for sports, but again, we all knew that I was not a gifted athlete. I remember specifically one day I was in 8th grade. And we were sitting at our kitchen table and we were talking about my future because I was about to enter high school. And my mother suggested to me, well, you're not going to be on the baseball team or the hockey team, but you want to be involved. She said, why don't you write a letter to the hockey coach at Duluth East High School? And in Minnesota, you guys know this, I'm sure, hockey is kingpin. Hockey is to Minnesotans what football is to Texans or Floridians, and basketball is to Indiana. And the school, my high school, was one of the strongest programs in the state, an elite program. And she says, why don't you ask the coach if you could be the student manager? Well, I didn't even know what a student manager was. I said, what's that all about? And so my parents explained it to me. It's, well, you kind of just help out the coach, whatever they need you to do. You might have to fill up water bottles or whatever needs to be done. And so I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I wrote a letter to the hockey coach. And a week later, I got a response back. And he said, the job is yours.
Mm.
I hadn't even met this guy, but he said, you will be the student manager when you arrive on campus. And he just said he really liked the idea that I took the initiative to approach him about that possibility. Well, I was the student manager for all 3 years of my high school career. Back then, high school was just 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And my senior year, when we had our annual end of the year banquet, they give out all the awards and everything. Well, they came to the last award of the evening, and it was the most valuable player award. And I won the award.
Wow.
The student manager of the
Wow.
hockey team was given the most valuable player award. And again, I look back on it and I give my parents so much credit for even suggesting that, but they had instilled in me basically a Colossians 3:23 attitude. Whatever you do, do it to the best of your ability. Well, I poured my heart and soul into that team. And I tried to serve the players, the coaches as best I could. And for them, after 3 years of that service, for them to say, you're our most valuable player. Wow. I was, to this day, I'm stunned at that. But again, it launched me into the world of sports, even though, like you said earlier, Mark, I'm not a player. I don't have to be a player. I later found another avenue, and that's through the world of journalism. My junior year of high school, I became the sports editor of our school newspaper. And the senior year, I became the editor-in-chief of the paper. After my senior year, I was given a scholarship. It's called a working scholarship at our local newspaper, the Duluth Herald News Tribune. They hired one high school student each summer to be an intern. And that's actually how I got my name, because I was assigned to cover the Duluth Superior Dukes baseball team. At the time, they were a Class A affiliate with the Chicago White Sox. And
All right, so hold on. Your birth certificate does not say Dukes. Is that what you're saying?
okay, I'll agree with that. Don't ask me what it says.
Okay.
But again, I took that into college, became the sports editor of our college newspaper, and it just gave me another tie into the sports world. I growing up, all we think of are the athletes, but there's so many more possibilities to be involved. And back in 1973, when I started my teaching career, back then, they hired teachers and then they assigned you coaching positions. You didn't have a choice in it. And I became the assistant hockey coach. And I had played some hockey in my youth, but I learned a lot in preparing to become the assistant hockey coach. Later became the head baseball coach at high school. So the coaching positions, the journalism, student manager, all those just allowed me to basically answer what I believe is the call the Lord put on my life.
I cannot avoid the obvious here, at least to me. The beginning of that whole story, Dukes, is a position that most people probably would not aspire to.
Right.
Because it's more like handing out a towel versus getting the letter on your jacket, kind of mentality. So you, and as you credited your parents, you started out, even in high school, with the idea of being a servant first. that's huge for having that platform that you built the rest of, and following the discernment that God and the Holy Spirit had for you as you will, walk through teaching and into all the other things you mentioned. I'd say something about that, the importance of having a servant mentality.
Well, at the time, John, I doubt that I got into this to be a servant. I was thrilled to death that I would be able to be a part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
I rode the bus with the team. Everything that was team oriented, I was included. And just that inclusiveness really, particularly at the high school level, it really satisfied me. But I think you're right in that through that position, I learned the importance of servant leadership. And as my faith has grown over the years, that has come to be just a fundamental part of what faith is all about, is that servanthood. If I can, I'll share a quick story about, I mentioned I've been involved in FCA for 50 years. And one year I was leading the college group at University of Minnesota, Duluth, and the hockey captain was one of our leaders in FCA, but he was a very soft spoken. He was a man of very few words, and you would not pick him out to be a captain of a Division I hockey team. But people had so much respect for him because he led by example, not necessarily by words, but by example. And one of the greatest examples of servant leadership was when he became captain. Now he's a senior, Division I hockey. One of the traditions at that school was that when they went on road trips, when they, from Duluth, they might fly to Denver for a hockey series. And the freshmen always carried the seniors' bags to the airplane and that kind of stuff. It's one of those, traditions in colleges. And this guy's name is Bo. And when Bo was captain, Bo said to his teammates, he said, from now on, we seniors are going to carry the freshman bags. And, you would think that there'd be rebellion, but they bought into it. And the seniors started carrying the freshmen's bags. And I just love that story as an example of being a servant leader. And that's what Bo was. He was always thinking in those regards. But again, a man of few words, but just that example. Wow, that was big.
Well, it's just first of all, it's a cool story. Thank you for sharing. Second of all, it's an example that leadership isn't assigned by title or responsibility or by personality. And really, leadership at the end of the day is influence. And the more you put others first, the more you seek to serve first in the way that you lead, the more compelling, the more attractive, the more effective you are in accomplishing what you want to accomplish. Obviously, for Bo, he wanted to make a cultural change on the team. And he had put in enough, he had built enough relationship capital with the way he lived to be able to say, this is what we're going to do, lead by example, and get others to follow. Like, I mean, there's so much we could continue the rest of the conversation just on unpacking wisdom from that. Hey, gentlemen, just a quick pause to let you know about an upcoming opportunity I'm really excited about. I'm looking for 6 to 8 guys who want to really grow as fathers, to level up their fathering game. Now, this isn't going to be a Bible study or a dive into the latest parenting philosophy fad. This is about becoming better fathers by becoming better men. Now, I realize this is not for everyone, but it is for you if you want to transform, if you want to get to something real and really accelerate your growth as a father. It's for you if you want to show up at your best for your kids. This group will kick off in January, and there's a lot more information to come, but all I'm asking right now is that you let me know that you're interested. If this sounds like something you're interested in or what you need right now to be the father that you want to be, then head on out to the website, thenextmanup.com/dad group. You can find that link in the show notes as well, thenextmanup.com/dad group, and just sign up. Just tell me you're interested, and there'll be more information to come. Okay, back to the conversation.
So it might be time for us to get into, so what do you do now?
I work for the Tampa Bay Rays baseball team. I supervise the press box operation. But as I've been doing it now for 15 years. And as I learned the position, I really came to realize this is such an opportunity to be a servant leader. And a lot of times when people ask me, well, what do you do? What do you do for the Rays? And my first response is always to say, my job is to make people happy. And I need to, I work with home media, visiting media, representatives from each team, and they all have different demands, different wants, desires. And I said, my goal is just to try to keep everybody happy. And hopefully I'm succeeding at that. But it's an opportunity to serve, whether it's to get somebody a cup of coffee or get them whatever information they need. It's a joy. It's a joy to serve them.
Well, the few times, Dukes, that I've had the chance to visit you in the press box, no one looked mad or angry. So that, I think you're doing a good job.
So how did you go from teaching to press box manager for the Rays?
Well, I retired from teaching in 2007, and I moved down to Sarasota with a primary goal of being a caretaker for my elderly mother. She was widowed in 1994. And at the time I moved down here, she was 89 years old, very independent, lived by herself. But we could see that age was creeping up and starting to take a toll. And our goal, when I say our, I mean my siblings and I, our goal was to keep her at home. She didn't want to ever end up in an assisted living. I cringe when I say that because I have so much respect for the people who work in assisted living facilities. They do just a tremendous job. But yet I understand my mother's desire to stay at home. And by moving down here and caretaking for her, we were able to do that. So I was her caretaker for the last 4 years of her life. The very week I moved down here, I wrote a letter to all the athletic directors in Sarasota, high school athletic directors, and to the University of South Florida in Tampa. I gave them my resume, my background. I worked in coaching. I worked in statistics. I was the official scorer for a hockey team for 37 years. I ran scoreboards, all that kind of stuff. And a few days later, I got a response from USF, South Florida, saying, hey, we have our first football game Friday night. Can you help us out? I said, sure. So I ended up during the 2007 football season working with South Florida. And during that time, I met a lot of people. And one of them was a guy who worked for ESPN, and he worked all the Rays games. And I told him, I said, Scott, I said, baseball is really my passion. I said, who would I write a letter to the Rays? And so he gave me the name of the vice president in charge of communication. And so I wrote him a letter. And again, same thing. I gave him my background. I said, if you ever have anything, that I could help with, I'd be really interested. Well, that was in November, and I didn't hear anything, but I didn't expect to. Well, then sure enough, in February, I got a phone call from this guy, vice president of the Rays. And the gentleman who was the supervisor of the press box prior to me, he had been there from the beginning with the Rays, from 1998. And now they're starting the 08 season. And he was elderly. He was in his mid 80s, and he had hip surgery the October of 07. And they thought he'd be recovered in time for the 08 season. Well, it got to be spring training and he was having complications. So this vice president, his name is Rick, and he said, I remember the letter you wrote, and I put it in my file, and I pulled it out, and he said, can you help us out? So I was thrilled, obviously, and long story short, Jerry, the original press box supervisor, he never did make it back. He lived 4 more years, but he was never healthy enough to fulfill the job responsibilities. But it was almost like after I met Jerry, and Jerry was a legend. Jerry was a legend at Tropicana Field. When I first started meeting people at Tropicana, and when I was being introduced as the press box guy, and people, they didn't welcome me. They said, where's Jerry? What's wrong with Jerry? Why isn't Jerry here? We need Jerry. And so I'm wondering, who's this Jerry guy? Well, I finally met Jerry, and he and I, again, we hit it off, and we became very good friends. And it was almost like Jerry felt like he could pass the baton off now. He's met me, and he feels comfortable enough with me, and so we had a lot of good times, even though he wasn't working anymore. And so I've been there ever since, and it's been such a blessing. Oh, such a blessing.
So who knew that the letter that your mom inspired you to write all the way back there as an 8th grader would begin a pattern that ultimately led to the role that you're in today? How cool is that?
Well, it goes back to what I said about it's a God incident.
Sure.
It's not a coincidence. God knew what he was doing, and he paved the way. And yeah, I agree, Mark. That's that's the way I look at it. I mean, to where I am today, it all goes back to that letter.
Yeah. Well, it's just another reminder of the influence that we can have as parents on our kids, for good or for ill. You know, like
Yes.
it goes both ways. And obviously we're trying to encourage a positive influence in what we're doing here, but we are influential in one way or another, whether we realize it or not.
Can I say something about that? As a teacher and a coach, I'm not a parent, obviously. I'm a lifelong bachelor. But one of my greatest fears as a teacher and a coach was that I might say something someday that in my mind was inconsequential, and yet it might have been perceived by a student or an athlete in a way that I didn't even realize. And I'll give you one example. One of my hockey players, 10 years after he graduated, we ran into each other. And I don't remember the very specifics of the conversation, but he said, hey, Dukes, do you remember the time that you told me this? And I said, no, I don't remember that at all. He says, well, it changed my life.
Mm.
And here, I don't remember saying that, but to him, it was a life-changing statement. And that's kind of scary because like you said, Mark, for good or for bad, each night when I went to bed, when I was teaching, I tried to think back on, did I raise my voice to somebody today that might have caused hurt? And I just had to apologize to the Lord and ask for his forgiveness for the times that I did stuff like that. But we don't realize it at the time. So you're right. We are influential, and it, we constantly need to be seeking to do good in our kids.
Dukes, when you and I met, I don't even remember what year it was. It was probably 2009 or 10, something like that. And we met because you, I think it's fair to say, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you continued to follow opportunities that God gives you to influence people. And one of those is through Baseball Chapel. You hinted at that a little earlier. So I think it's interesting to hear what is Baseball Chapel and what that role looks like for you, how that, what have you seen happen because of that opportunity God's given you?
Yeah, Baseball Chapel, just like FCA, has just been such a powerful instrument in my life. And I had heard of Baseball Chapel. It was started, I think it was 1954. No, that was FCA. Baseball Chapel, I think, started in 1973 by a sports editor in Detroit, and who was a very strong Christian. And the whole premise behind Baseball Chapel is that these pro baseball players, by the nature of the sport as it is today, right or wrong, basically can't get to church on Sundays. And so Baseball Chapel brings the church to them. And so we have chapels at with every team, professional team, major and minor leagues. Now I know there was 210 teams, but that was prior to the realignment of the minor leagues a couple of years ago. So I don't know exactly how many teams now, but it's in the hundreds of teams. Each team has a chaplain, and so players have an opportunity to worship the Lord on Sundays. Our team chaplain with the Rays, his name was Gio, just an incredible man. He was the chaplain from the start back in '98. He served as chaplain for, I take that back, he didn't start in '98, but he was the chaplain for 16 years, and he just left the Rays 2 years ago. So he was the chaplain when I joined the Rays organization. Now, I need to make it clear here that my role with the Rays as the press box supervisor and my role with Baseball Chapel are completely different. I just happen to be working with the Rays. So over time, as it evolved, I sort of became Gio's assistant. He few occasions where he couldn't make chapel or a Bible study or something, he would invite me to lead it or whatever. And so we became close friends and worked well together. And several years, and then I got involved, and that's where I met you, John, with the Pirates minor league team. And then I've worked with the Orioles minor league teams here in Sarasota. I still work with the Rays minor leaguers down in Port Charlotte. And so we try to hold a chapel once a week, and then also a Bible study for these guys. There was a couple of years I was doing the Orioles, the Rays, and the Pirates. So I was going 6 nights a week doing with Baseball Chapel, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It's interesting, especially at the minor leaguers. Many of them are first-year professionals. For many of them, it's their first time away from home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to challenge them to, maybe for the first time in their life, to take a serious look at faith. I think it's easy as we grew up. In fact, I'm as guilty as anybody of kind of taking faith for granted. I mean, we do what our parents do, and but this is a time to start thinking about, what do you believe? What role do you want faith to be in your life? And it's been so much fun. It's been so much fun watching the growth in so many of these guys. And now that I've been in it for, all these years, it's cool to see their faith journeys develop. A lot of the players I started with now are retired, and yet I still try to make contact with them. It's fun now because of trades and free agencies. I have contacts with almost every other team now.
Everybody knows Dukes. Everybody
Well,
knows
let's not
Dukes.
go that far, John, but it is fun when a visiting team comes to town, and
Yeah.
our next homestand, we play Texas, and their first baseman Nathaniel Lowe started with the Rays, and we became really good friends. And they have a pitcher, Taylor Hearn, who was with the Pirates when I first met him, and so I'm hoping to be able to get together with these guys when they come to town. So it's a real ministry to be able to bring the church to these guys. And I'm so blessed because, like I say, I get to work with minor leaguers, major leaguers. It's been such a joy.
So one little follow-up question there. Those young men that are out on their own for the first time, you've had the chance to sort of not only watch their faith grow, but for their sense of who they are becoming as a man as well. What kind of conversations happen along that line?
Today I also work with an organization called Loving Hands Ministry. It's a drug rehab program. And today we talked about just the whole concept of prepare. John the Baptist came saying, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Well, what does that mean? What do prepare? And we talked about the importance of preparing for marriage, preparing for your career. Everything involves preparation. And we have the same kind of conversation in Baseball Chapel Bible studies. I try to put in perspective for these guys. They're obviously at the spring training facility because of their career. This is they're launching their career, and that's paramount in their mind. And I try to convince them that, your faith is so much more important than your career. And so we get into those kinds of conversation. And yeah, like you said, growing as men, that is so fruitful and so joyous to watch that happen in these guys. As I mentioned, I'm not a parent, but I think I get the same feeling that a parent must get when they see their child develop and sprout their wings and mature. And I've seen a lot of it. It's really wonderful.
Dukes, I said this before we started recording, and I knew I had to find a way to work it in. So you are now the veteran in our clubhouse here, bringing your wisdom, bringing your stories, your experience. But I don't know how many things you've got your hands into, even having a few more laps around the sun than John and I do, but you're still going. So as the veteran who has seen so much, I'm curious, what has you as a person or even professionally, however this surfaces for you, what has you inspired right now?
Wow, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to my mind is just my faith. My faith, as we grow in our faith, God never ceases to become more amazing every day. Sometimes I get mad at myself and say, why am I so amazed at what God just did today? Because I should expect that by now.
Right.
But yet I do. I marvel at every day. Lately, God has worked this on me, and I forget where I was talking to somebody about different gifts. And when you look at God's forgiveness, God's mercy, God's love for us, God's grace, you can't quantify those things. And they're becoming even more enormous to me on a daily basis. And that inspires me. I'm inspired by so many of these young men. I mentioned to you that this Loving Hands ministry. These are young men who have, for the most part, reached the bottom. Most of them have come from prison, addiction, and by giving their life to Jesus Christ, it's unbelievable the change that they've made in their lives. Each of these men who come to this program and this facility commits 2 years of their life to this program. They're not admitted unless they're going to stay for 2 years. I don't think I could ever do that. Stay. You want me to spend 2 years in this program? That's a long time. So they inspire me that they're willing to do that. And I often wonder, boy, you must have really been hit the pits to be able to do that. But I tell them every time I go up there and minister to them, I tell them how much they inspire me. I might be your teacher for the day, but you guys who are inspiring. So many of these ball players, we don't have time probably to get into the full story, but maybe you heard about some of our players with the Rays who kind of balked at having to wear gay logos during Pride Night at Tropicana Field, and they did it in such a loving way. There was no phobia, there was no putting anybody down, but they really wanted to live out their faith, and that's what they said they were doing. And man, they inspire me that they were able to do that. So there's inspiration every day, not just in the baseball world, but Loving Hands, or just in these conversations that we're having. So it's I've been so blessed. A lot of people inspire me, but certainly it's all stems from faith in Jesus. As I shared with you guys at the beginning, I'm not a podcast guy. I'm not a tech guy, but I love having conversations about the Lord, and so this time has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. I don't know that if there's anybody out who hears this will benefit from my story. I hope so. But we all have an obligation through the Great Commission to share our lives and share our stories. And I appreciate the opportunity to do that today.
Well, Diggs, before we land the plane, everybody can't see, but I'm wearing a Rays jersey, which isn't technically my team, but I live around Tampa. So I'm curious, it's September 9th as we're recording this. So when everybody's listening to this, history will already have played out. But the Rays started a three-game series this weekend. It's the final series with the Yankees. They're playing in New York. And so we've got like 25-ish games left in the season, something like that. So I have two questions. I want to ask you to give your predictions. One, how far are the Rays going to go? And two, who's going to win the World Series?
John, I don't like these questions.
Come on, give it to us.
Well, number one, first of all, I am a Rays, not only a fan, I'm a diehard Rays fan.
Of course.
I'm a diehard Minnesota Twins fan. And I constantly get asked when the Rays and Twins play, who do you cheer for? Who's going to win? And my standard response is, well, both. I cheer for both. Maybe I'd be a good politician. I don't know.
Oh, you would, no doubt.
So I'm going to, the Rays will go as far as we can. And
That's not an
All right.
answer. That's not an answer.
Yeah.
That's not an answer. That's an evasive response.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I was trying to do. Yeah, I'm not one to in prediction. If you had told me 2 months ago, and again, I know this is what, September 9th,
Yep.
2 months ago that the Rays would even be in the conversation, I would have said, no, it's over. The Yankees have won this division. They had a 15-game lead at one point, and now it's down to 5.
I know.
So I'm quite confident that we will make the playoffs, which was
Sure.
in doubt for a while.
Mhm.
But not knowing who we're going to play, you're asking a very unfair question, John.
All right. Well, do you have a prediction about the World Series?
Nope.
Do you want to go there? All right. I'll let you off. That's fine.
You're a good man, John. I'll say the Rays or the Twins will go win the World Series.
Oh, okay.
That's from my heart, not from my head.
Okay.
That's a way to make all the sides happy.
Everybody's happy. Yeah.
Well, Dukes, you're a good man too. And we are honored that you spent some of your precious time with us today, sharing your story, letting us capture it and react to it, and be inspired and encouraged by it in the way that you have found the path, found the path that God has created you for, and you're fully living into it. And I'm not suggesting you're on this pedestal. I'm just saying you're an inspiration to those coming behind, that it doesn't matter whether you're getting $20 million a year to throw a fastball or you're schlepping towels and jerseys around in the locker room or anything in between. When you can give yourself fully to the desires that God has planted in you and serve others in the process, then I think that is how we become the fullest expressions of what he meant when he said, Dukes, live, John, live, Mark, go be. And so thank you for showing us that it can be done and for reminding us that it's our responsibility to do it, and allowing us to catch some stories and some laughter along the way. It's been a real pleasure, and can't thank you enough for joining us.
Well, again, it was my pleasure. And thank you guys for the opportunity.
Well, guys, there's so many different themes that I enjoyed through that conversation. Listening to Dukes' faith journey, the whole segment on servant leadership that we could have gone deeper on, the idea of following a desire to really live it out as a calling, this desire that God gives us to really live that out as a calling. What does that look like? And then, of course, the influence that we as fathers, we as parents have on our kids. All of those themes really resonated with me. What is it that resonated with you? If you've made it this far, you listened to the whole thing. What are you taking away? What was the insight? What was the learning for you? And maybe it was just listening to a delightful story. Or maybe there was something that stirred in you that you can turn into action. Whatever it is, as we do, I challenge you to not let this be information, but let it work for positive transformation in your life. And then as it does, it plays out into positive transformation in the life of your kids and your home and those with whom you have influence. Okay, that's enough, guys. Thank you for being a part of another episode, for being part of the community that is about being and raising healthy and godly men. We will be back again next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.